When my husband Richard passed away last spring, the world I had carefully built over 35 years seemed to crumble beneath my feet. Our hardware supply business, Milford and Sons, had been our shared dream since 1989. A small storefront in Cambridge that grew into a regional supplier with 3 locations across Massachusetts. The days following the funeral were a blur of paperwork and decisions I never wanted to make alone. Eric, our only son, had been working with us since graduating from Boston College. At 38, he had Richard's confidence and my eye for detail. At least that's what I told myself. He'd been running the Framingham location for 5 years, and customers loved him. When he suggested taking over the company entirely, it felt like the natural next step. I was 62, tired from grief, and the thought of managing spreadsheets and vendor relationships without Richard beside me was overwhelming. "Mom, you've earned your rest," Eric said one evening as we sat in my kitchen, surrounded by sympathy cards and half-eaten casseroles from neighbors. "Dad would want you to enjoy retirement, travel a bit, maybe finally take that painting class you've talked about." His words painted a picture of peace I desperately wanted to believe in. So I made what seemed like the right decision. I would sell my controlling interest in the company to Eric at a family discount. My financial advisor frowned when I mentioned the figure, but I waved away her concerns. This wasn't about money. This was about legacy. The paperwork was signed on a Tuesday. I handed Eric not just the company, but $100,000 from my personal savings, money Richard and I had set aside for our retirement years. "Consider it startup capital for your vision," I told him, squeezing his hand across the lawyer's desk. "Your father would be proud." Eric's eyes had welled with tears. "I'll make it worth every penny, Mom. I'll grow it 10 times over." His promise hung in the air between us, and I believed it with a mother's unshakable faith. The transition was swift. Within weeks, Eric had moved his office to the main headquarters in Cambridge. He hired a marketing consultant and a new operations manager. The company logo was redesigned, business cards reprinted. I watched from the sidelines, offering occasional advice that was received with decreasing enthusiasm. "We're going digital first, Mom," he'd explained during our Sunday dinners, which became less frequent as months passed. "The old customer base is important, but we need to attract younger contractors." I nodded along, trying to ignore the sting when he referred to Richard's loyal clients as the old customer base. These were people who had watched Eric grow up, who had sent him graduation cards and Christmas bonuses. Summer turned to fall, and our conversations shifted. Eric started bringing his wife, Melissa, to our less frequent family meals. Their conversations revolved around country club memberships and the new circle of friends they were cultivating, other young executives and their spouses. The business updates became vaguer, glossier. "The rebrand is really taking off," he'd say, showing me sleek photos of the renovated showroom where my collection of local contractor photos once hung. "We've increased our social media presence by 300%. I smiled and nodded, pushing away the memory of Richard saying that business was built on handshakes, not hashtags. The holidays came, and Eric and Melissa hosted Thanksgiving at their newly purchased colonial in Brookline. I brought my mother's china and offered to cook, but Melissa had hired a caterer. I sat at their glossy dining table, feeling like a guest in my son's new life rather than its foundation. January brought my birthday, and with it, a brief phone call and flowers delivered by a service. February passed without the annual company financial review Eric had promised. When I called to ask about it, his assistant, someone I'd never met, told me he was in meetings all week. "Perhaps next month would be better, Mrs. Milford," she suggested, not knowing I had chosen the company's first health insurance plan or that I'd worked through pneumonia during the blizzard of '98 to fulfill a major order. I hung up the phone and stared at the calendar on my kitchen wall, the one from the company that still had Richard's handwriting marking important delivery dates from the previous year. I traced his familiar scrawl with my fingertip and realized that giving my son everything meant I was slowly fading from the picture altogether. Still, I told myself this was natural. Growth required change. Eric was building his own legacy now. I never expected anything in return for my sacrifice. That's not what mothers do. I just never imagined that the distance between us would grow wider than the check I'd written. The invitation to the company's 35th anniversary gala arrived in March, embossed with the new logo and promising a celebration of legacy and future. I traced the elegant lettering and felt a flutter of hope. Perhaps this would be my chance to reconnect with the company I'd built and the son who now carried its future. I spent hours getting ready for the anniversary gala. My navy dress, bought 3 years ago for a Chamber of Commerce dinner, still fit perfectly. I made an appointment at Diane's salon downtown, the same place I'd been going for 20 years, and let her work her magic on my silver-streaked hair. She styled it in an elegant updo that made me feel 10 years younger. "Going somewhere special, Helen?" Diane asked as she pinned the last strand in place. "The company's anniversary celebration," I replied, a hint of pride in my voice. "First time I've been to the new headquarters since Eric took over." Diane smiled knowingly in the mirror. "Bet they're rolling out the red carpet for you. Can't have Milford and Sons without the original Milford woman, right?" Her words warmed me. Perhaps I had been too sensitive these past months. Tonight would be different. Tonight was about legacy, and nobody could deny mine. The new headquarters occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming office building in downtown Boston. As my taxi pulled up, I felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with nostalgia. Richard would have whistled at the valet parking and marble entrance. "Quite a step up from our first stockroom," he would have said, squeezing my hand. The elevator whisked me to the 15th floor, where a young woman with a tablet checked my name against the guest list. "Mrs. Milford, welcome," she said brightly. "Everyone's been looking forward to meeting you." Meeting me. As if I were a distant relative visiting from abroad, not the woman who had ordered the company's first computers and personally delivered supplies during the transit strike of '97. The main conference room had been transformed with twinkling lights and floral arrangements. A string quartet played in the corner, and waiters circulated with champagne and canapés. I recognized a few faces, longtime clients and vendors, but most were strangers in expensive suits, laughing over cocktails. I was searching for Eric when Janet Kowalski, our first office manager, spotted me. Her hug was genuine, her eyes bright with recognition. "Helen, thank God there's someone here who remembers when we used to make coffee in that ancient percolator." She lowered her voice. "These kids with their espresso machines and cold brew stations don't know how good they have it." We shared a laugh, and for a moment, I felt grounded again. Janet introduced me to her replacement, a polished young woman named Alicia, who spoke reverently about the company's humble beginnings. I smiled through the conversation, trying not to wince at her use of past tense. Finally, Eric appeared at my elbow. "Mom, you made it." His kiss landed somewhere near my cheek. "You look nice." Before I could respond, he was pulled away by a man in an Italian suit. "Just a sec," Eric mouthed at me. "Major investor." I stood awkwardly, clutching my champagne flute. Melissa appeared briefly, stunning in a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She air-kissed me, complimented my vintage dress, and disappeared to mingle with a group of younger women near the bar. Dinner was served at elegantly appointed tables. I was seated with Janet, 2 retired salesmen and their wives, the old guard, as one waiter referred to us when bringing our entrees. From across the room, I could see Eric at the center table with Melissa, her parents, and what appeared to be important clients. Mr. Henderson, Melissa's father, was gesturing animatedly while Eric nodded intently. After dessert, Eric took the stage, microphone in hand. The room quieted. He looked confident and handsome under the spotlight, and my heart swelled despite everything. This was my son, Richard's son, commanding attention with the same easy charm his father had possessed. "Welcome, everyone, to this milestone celebration," he began. 35 years of Milford and Sons. 3.5 decades of quality, service, and community partnership. He spoke eloquently about innovation and adaptability, about the company's evolution from a small family operation to a regional leader in construction supply. He thanked investors, praised his team, and raised a toast to those who came before. My chest tightened with anticipation. This was it, the acknowledgement I hadn't realized I'd been craving. "Tonight is about honoring legacy while embracing future," Eric continued. "And speaking of legacy, I'd like to recognize the strong women who helped shape this company. He gestured toward my table. My mother, Helen, who alongside my late father, built the foundation we stand on today. Polite applause rippled through the room as a spotlight found me. I smiled, feeling a flush of pride and vindication. Eric stepped down from the stage and approached my table, reaching into his jacket pocket. For my mother, a token of appreciation, he handed me a small velvet bag. The room grew quiet as I opened it. Inside was a handbag, small, synthetic, with an unfamiliar brand name embossed on a gold-colored clasp. I turned it over and spotted the price tag, still attached, 5 Arjdarn. A few chuckles broke the silence. Someone whispered, "Is that a joke?" Eric was already moving back toward the stage, a practiced smile fixed on his face. "And now," he announced, his voice ringing with sudden enthusiasm, "I'd like to recognize another woman whose support and wisdom have been invaluable to Melissa and me." The spotlight shifted to Melissa's mother, Caroline Henderson, who rose gracefully from her seat at the center table. Eric guided her to the stage as dramatic music swelled from hidden speakers. Caroline has been an incredible mentor, not just to her daughter, but to me as a business leader. Her insights have helped shape our company's new direction. With theatrical flourish, he produced a long, slender box. Caroline gasped with what seemed like rehearsed surprise as Eric opened it to reveal a diamond necklace that caught and scattered the spotlight's beam. $10,000 is a small price to pay for the woman who inspires my wife and me every day, Eric announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent room. Cameras flashed. Applause erupted. Caroline touched the diamonds at her throat with manicured fingers, beaming at the crowd. I sat frozen, the cheap bag clutched in my hands, the price tag now burning against my palm like a brand. The room seemed to tilt and blur. Janet reached over to squeeze my hand, her face tight with second-hand embarrassment and anger. "Helen," she whispered, "let's get some air." But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. In that moment, as champagne corks popped and Caroline Henderson basked in her $10,000 spotlight, something hardened inside me. This wasn't just embarrassment. This was betrayal etched in diamonds and delivered with a smile. I maintained my composure through the remainder of the evening. Years of business negotiations had taught me the value of a poker face. I smiled at well-wishers, laughed at appropriate moments, and even posed for a company newsletter photo with Eric and the executive team. The $5 handbag remained tucked beneath my chair, abandoned like yesterday's newspaper. Janet drove me home, the silence in her car thick with unspoken outrage. "You know," she finally said as we turned onto my street, "that boy wouldn't know how to order office supplies if you hadn't taught him the difference between a purchase order and a packing slip." A small laugh escaped me, though it held no humor. That summer when he was 16, I recalled. Richard wanted him playing baseball, but Eric insisted on learning inventory. "You stayed 2 hours after closing every Tuesday and Thursday," Janet nodded. "Teaching him QuickBooks while other kids were at the mall." We pulled into my driveway, the motion sensor light illuminating my modest Colonial, the home Richard and I had purchased when the company first turned a profit. Not large or fancy, but paid for with honest work and careful planning. "Want me to come in? Open a bottle of wine and curse men in general?" Janet offered. I squeezed her hand. "I appreciate it, but I need some time alone." Inside, I kicked off my heels and moved through the darkened house without turning on lights. The quiet wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. I'd grown accustomed to silence since Richard died, had even come to find comfort in it. Tonight, though, the silence felt different, charged with purpose rather than emptiness. In the kitchen, I poured a finger of Richard's scotch, Glenfiddich, kept for special occasions, and carried it to his study. Nothing had changed in this room since his death. His reading glasses still rested on a stack of business journals. His ancient Rolodex, obsolete but cherished, sat beside the computer I'd finally convinced him to use in his last years. I settled into his leather chair and swiveled to face the wall of photographs behind the desk. There was Eric at 5, sitting on a stack of lumber at our first warehouse. Eric at 12, proudly wearing a company t-shirt at the Framingham 4th of July parade. Eric at 22, shaking hands with our biggest supplier after negotiating his first contract. And there, my eyes lingered on a particular frame, was a photo taken during the blizzard of 2008. The power had gone out at the Cambridge location. We'd lost heat, but a major hospital order was due. Eric and I had worked by lantern light, wrapping pipe fittings in blankets to keep them from freezing, while Richard negotiated with the one truck driver willing to brave the storm. We'd delivered on time. The hospital administrator had sent a handwritten thank you note that we'd framed and hung in the front office. My gaze moved to the wall safe hidden behind a watercolor of Cape Cod. Richard had insisted on keeping important documents at home rather than a bank. "Never trust your life's work to strangers," he'd say. I spun the combination, our wedding date, and pulled out a blue folder labeled Business Legal. Inside was the contract I'd signed when transferring my share of the company to Eric. My lawyer, Stephen Abernathy, had insisted on several protective clauses that I'd found unnecessary at the time. "Family businesses can get complicated," he'd cautioned. "Emotions and money make dangerous partners." I'd waved away his concerns. A particular clause caught my eye. The silent partner, me, retained the right to revoke the transfer agreement if the company's operations substantially deviated from its core values and mission as established by its founders. The clause included a specific provision about the treatment of legacy employees and founding family members, ensuring they would be accorded respect commensurate with their contributions to the company's establishment and growth. I took another sip of Scotch, feeling it warm my throat and clarify my thoughts. "This is Eric we're talking about," I'd said. "My son. Richard's son." Stephen had persisted, adding language that seemed overly cautious then, but prophetic now. This wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the public humiliation, though that still burned like acid in my stomach. This was about something far more fundamental. The soul of the company Richard and I had built with calloused hands and sleepless nights. I remembered the early years when we'd maxed out credit cards to make payroll. The Christmas Eve when Richard and I had personally delivered a rush order because our driver's child was sick. The time I'd taken out a second mortgage on our house without telling Richard, just to secure the financing for our second location. Eric hadn't just forgotten these stories. He'd dismissed them as irrelevant to the shiny, rebranded future he envisioned. A future where his mother-in-law's social connections were valued at $10,000, while his own mother's sacrifice warranted a $5 token. On my desk calendar, I circled tomorrow's date. Next to it, I wrote, "Call Stephen Abernathy, 9 a.m. Then I opened my laptop and began compiling documents, financial records, emails, photos from the gala that guests had already started posting online. The image of Caroline Henderson's diamond necklace gleamed from several shots, the lighting perfect as if professional photographers had been positioned in advance. I worked methodically, fueled by a clarity I hadn't felt since before Richard's death. This wasn't revenge I was planning. Revenge was emotional, impulsive. This was correction, a realignment of values that had drifted dangerously off course. Near dawn, I finally closed the laptop and moved to the bedroom. I didn't bother changing out of my dress, just lay atop the covers, staring at the ceiling. Sleep eluded me, but I didn't mind. My mind was busy cataloging memories that Eric had seemingly forgotten. The night we'd stayed up until 3 a.m. finishing his science fair project while he slept upstairs, exhausted from a basketball tournament. The college tuition checks I'd written, even during lean years when I'd gone without new clothes or car repairs. The down payment I'd contributed for his first house. Just between us, I'd told him. No need for Melissa to know. The $100,000 I'd handed him from my retirement fund, with nothing but his promise as collateral. As first light crept through the blinds, I rose and showered, washing away the previous night's makeup and letting hot water soothe my tense shoulders. I dressed in a simple black pantsuit, my negotiation outfit, Richard had called it. The clothes I wore when deals needed closing. The house phone rang at 8:15. Eric's number flashed on the caller ID. I watched it ring until voicemail picked up. His message was brief. "Mom, call me back. We need to talk about last night. I think you misunderstood." I deleted it without hesitation and poured my morning coffee into a travel mug. At precisely 9 a.m., I picked up the phone and dialed Stephen Abernathy's number. "Helen," he answered warmly. "It's been too long. How are you?" "I need your help, Stephen," I replied, my voice steady. "It's about that clause you insisted on, the one I thought we'd never use." There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. "I've been expecting this call," he admitted. "Shall we say 10:30 at my office?" "I'll be there," I confirmed, already gathering my keys and the blue folder. "And Stephen? We'll need to move quickly. I have a board meeting to arrange." My meeting with Stephen was productive and decisive. Over coffee in his downtown office, we reviewed the contract clause in detail, confirming its enforceability. Stephen's assistant took notes as we mapped out a strategy that was as much about message as legal maneuvering. "The element of surprise is crucial here," Stephen advised, leaning back in his leather chair. "If Eric gets wind of this before the formal board meeting, he'll have time to prepare counterarguments or worse, try to amend the agreement." "He doesn't even remember the clause exists," I replied. "He signed the papers without reading them thoroughly." Richard always said Eric's greatest weakness was assuming he already knew everything. Stephen nodded thoughtfully. "I'll prepare the board meeting notification myself. We'll keep it professionally vague, just enough to satisfy legal requirements without tipping our hand." "When can we schedule it?" "Board bylaws require 5 business days' notice unless there's an emergency." He checked his calendar. "How does next Thursday sound? 10 a.m.? I nodded. "Perfect. And the wording of the notice?" Stephen smiled. "How does review of shareholder interests and corporate values alignment sound? Formal enough to demand attendance, vague enough to prevent preparation." "Add required attendance to the subject line," I suggested. "Eric hates mandatory meetings. It'll irritate him just enough." As promised, Stephen sent the board meeting notices that afternoon. I received my copy at 3:17 p.m., a formal email addressed to all board members, major shareholders, and executive officers. Eric's name was prominently listed in the recipient field, alongside the board chair, CFO, and corporate counsel. Then the waiting began. I expected an immediate reaction, a phone call, a text, perhaps even an unannounced visit. But the hours passed in silence. I prepared dinner, watched the evening news, and went through Richard's old files, organizing paperwork I'd neglected since his death. By 9 p.m., my phone remained silent. I checked it twice to ensure it was working properly. Was it possible Eric hadn't seen the email? No. He kept his phone practically attached to his hand, notifications always active. The silence was deliberate then. Perhaps he was consulting with his own lawyers, or maybe he was simply too stunned to respond. The next morning brought more silence. I went about my routine: breakfast, a walk around the neighborhood, coffee with my neighbor Martha. I mentioned nothing about the upcoming meeting or my plans. Martha chattered about her grandchildren and an upcoming church fundraiser, and I nodded along, my mind elsewhere. By afternoon, a text finally arrived. "What's this board meeting about? Busy week ahead. Can we reschedule?" No greeting, no sign-off. I didn't respond. Let him wonder. Let him search through his memory for what this could possibly be about. Let him feel a fraction of the uncertainty I'd felt sitting in that gala, holding a $5 insult in my hands. The second day brought a more formal email, copied to his executive assistant. "Mother, I notice you've requested a board meeting on short notice. As CEO, I should be briefed on the agenda items prior to notifying the full board. Please call my office to discuss." His signature included his new title and the company's slogan, "Building Tomorrow's Success Today." Again, I offered no response. Stephen had advised radio silence, and I found it surprisingly empowering. For so long, I'd been the one waiting for calls, arranging my schedule around Eric's availability, making myself small to fit into the corners of his new life. On the third day, the dam broke. 3 missed calls before noon, 5 text messages, each more urgent than the last. "Mom, call me back ASAP. Is everything okay? Are you sick? This meeting is causing problems with investors. Need to talk now. If this is about the gala, you're overreacting. Mom, seriously, call me." My doorbell rang at 6:15 p.m. Through the peephole, I could see Eric on my porch, still in his business suit, his expression a mix of irritation and uncertainty. I stepped away from the door and into the kitchen, where I couldn't hear his knocking. 20 minutes later, I watched from behind the curtains as he finally returned to his BMW and drove away. That night, a voicemail. "Mom, it's me. Listen, I think I know what this is about, and I'm sorry if the gift seemed thoughtless. It was just a joke. Melissa thought it would be funny. The dinner was stressful, lots of investors watching. I've been under tremendous pressure with the expansion plans. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Call me back, okay? We can fix this. Maybe do a proper recognition at the next company event? You deserve that. Anyway, call me, please." I played the message twice. Not once did he mention the $10,000 necklace for Caroline. Not once did he acknowledge the public humiliation, the contrast, the message it sent to everyone in that room. His apology wasn't for what he'd done. It was for my reaction to it. The distinction was crucial. The fourth day of silence brought a bouquet of flowers delivered to my door. Pink roses, which I'd mentioned more than once, weren't my favorite. The card read, "Sorry for the misunderstanding. Let's talk before Thursday. Love, Eric." I placed them on my front porch, where they sat until the delivery person from the florist came to retrieve the vase the next day. By Wednesday evening, Eric's messages had grown frantic. His final voicemail actually contained a note of fear. "Mom, please. Whatever this is about, we can work it out as a family. Don't do anything rash. The company is in a delicate position right now. I have plans that could be jeopardized by boardroom drama. Just call me, okay?" I didn't call. Instead, I laid out my burgundy suit for the morning, polished my grandmother's pearl earrings, and reviewed my notes one final time. Stephen had prepared a presentation folder for each board member, complete with photos, financial records, and a timeline of events since Eric had taken control. As I set my alarm for 6 a.m., my phone buzzed with one last text from Eric. "Fine. See you tomorrow. Hope you know what you're doing." I smiled at his words. For the first time in over a year, I knew exactly what I was doing. Thursday morning dawned clear and crisp, a perfect New England autumn day. I dressed methodically, each movement deliberate. The burgundy suit had been Richard's favorite. Power colors, he'd called them. I pinned my mother's pearls to my lapel rather than wearing them as earrings, a small deviation from tradition that felt right for the occasion. The company's headquarters looked different in morning light, less imposing, more transparent. I arrived 30 minutes early, as Stephen had suggested. The receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognize, looked startled when I gave my name. "Mrs. Milford, I didn't realize. The board meeting isn't until 10. "I know," I replied calmly. "I'd like to use the founder's office to prepare, please." Her confusion was evident. "I'm not sure which office you mean." "Corner office, 15th floor. It was my husband's. I believe my son uses it now." "Oh, Mr. Milford's office. Let me just call up to check if—" "That won't be necessary," I interrupted, my voice gentle but firm. "I'm still listed on the building security protocol as having full access. Richard insisted on that when we signed the lease 5 years ago." She hesitated, then checked her computer. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "You're right. I'll have security escort you up." The security guard, thankfully, was not new. George had been with us for over a decade, and his face broke into a genuine smile when he saw me. "Mrs. M, been too long. Heard you were coming in today." We chatted easily in the elevator. He filled me in on his grandchildren, and I asked after his wife's health. The familiarity was comforting, a reminder that not everything had changed. Richard's office had been completely redesigned. Gone was the warm cherry wood furniture, replaced by sleek glass and chrome. Digital displays had replaced family photos. The only remnant of the past was Richard's desk chair, though it had been reupholstered in black leather. I settled into that chair, feeling its familiar contours welcome me. For 15 minutes, I sat in silence, gathering my thoughts, centering myself in the space that had once been an extension of my daily life. Then I opened my briefcase and arranged my materials precisely on the glass desk. Board members began arriving at 9:45. I watched through the glass walls as they gathered in the hallway, glancing curiously toward the office where I sat. Stephen arrived at 9:50, nodding formally to me through the glass before greeting the others. At 9:58, Eric emerged from the elevator. He froze momentarily when he saw the gathering, his eyes darting to the office where I sat in his chair. His face cycled through several emotions: surprise, irritation, and finally, a mask of professional composure. He approached the group, shaking hands, his back deliberately turned to the glass wall separating us. At precisely 10 a.m., Stephen opened the boardroom doors. The members filed in, taking their assigned seats around the mahogany table. I remained in the office, watching, waiting for my cue. Eric took his place at the head of the table, shuffling papers, a picture of controlled authority. "Let's call this meeting to order," he began. "I understand there's been a request for—" Stephen interrupted smoothly. "Actually, Eric, this meeting was called by a founding shareholder under Article 7 of the company bylaws. As such, the chair for today's proceedings should be—" The boardroom door opened, and I entered. Every head turned. Several of the older board members instinctively rose, a habit of respect ingrained from years of working with Richard and me. "Helen," Stephen concluded with a nod. I moved to the head of the table. Eric remained seated, his knuckles white against the armrests of his chair. "Mrs. Milford," he said, emphasizing my formal title. "This is irregular. I wasn't briefed on any agenda items." "That was intentional," I replied, my voice steady. "Please take your seat among the board members, Eric." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He glanced at the corporate attorney, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Reluctantly, Eric moved to an empty chair midway down the table. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," I began, surveying the faces around me. Some curious, some concerned, all attentive. "I've called this meeting to address a serious matter regarding the company's direction and alignment with its founding principles." Stephen's assistant distributed the presentation folders. I waited until everyone had received theirs before continuing. "When I transferred controlling interest in Milford and Sons to my son last year, the agreement contained specific provisions regarding the company's core values and the treatment of its founding members." Eric flipped through his folder, his expression darkening. "Mother, if this is about that silly gift at the gala—" "This is about much more than a gift, Eric," I interrupted. "This is about patterns of behavior, financial decisions, and corporate culture. Please refer to page 3 of your folders." The room fell silent as board members examined the contents. Photos from the gala, including several clear shots of Caroline Henderson receiving her diamond necklace, alongside financial records showing the purchase had been made using the company's executive discretionary fund. $10,000 for a personal gift, charged to company accounts without board approval, I noted. Page 4 shows similar expenditures over the past 6 months. The CFO, James Winters, who had been with us since our second location opened, frowned deeply. "I wasn't aware of these allocations. They were coded as client relations," I explained. "But as you can see, the recipients were primarily friends and family of the Hendersons." Eric's face flushed. "Those were strategic relationship-building investments." "Including the country club membership for your father-in-law?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Or the spa weekend for Caroline's bridge club?" Page 7 details how these expenditures coincide with declining contributions to the Employee Retirement Fund and the elimination of the scholarship program for employees' children. The board members exchanged glances. Bernard Thompson, our longest-serving member, cleared his throat. "Helen, while these are concerning, I'm not sure they constitute a breach of fiduciary duty sufficient to—" "Page 12, I said simply. They turned to the page, which contained the full text of the special clause in my transfer agreement with Eric, along with a legal opinion from Stephen's firm confirming its enforceability. "As you can see," Stephen interjected, "Mrs. Milford retained the right to reclaim certain voting shares if the company's operations deviated substantially from its founding principles. The documentation we've provided demonstrates such deviation." Eric stood abruptly. "This is absurd. We've increased revenue by 22%. The rebranding has been a complete success. Ask anyone in the industry. Milford & Sons is more relevant now than it's been in years." "Relevant to whom?" I asked quietly. "Not to the employees whose profit-sharing bonuses were cut. Not to the local contractors who can no longer afford our new pricing structure. Not to your father's memory, and certainly not to mine. I turned to face the full board. I'm not here to undo the progress the company has made. I'm here to ensure that progress doesn't come at the expense of the values that built it. The next 2 hours were intense. Eric argued passionately for his vision of the company's future. Several board members raised concerns about market perception if leadership changed again so soon. The corporate attorney confirmed the validity of my claim while advising caution regarding execution. Throughout it all, I remained calm, responding to questions with facts rather than emotion. When Eric accused me of being stuck in the past, unwilling to embrace necessary change, I simply directed the board to the final page of the presentation, a comparison of employee turnover rates before and after his takeover. 38% of our experienced staff left within 6 months, I noted. People who had been with us for decades. That's not progress, that's erasure. At 12:45, Stephen called for a vote on my motion to exercise the clause and reclaim 26% of voting shares, which, combined with the 12% I still held, would give me controlling interest once again. The room grew silent as votes were cast. Eric stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, as the results were tallied. Motion carries, Stephen announced. Effective immediately, Helen Milford regains controlling interest in Milford & Sons Hardware Supply Company. I nodded once, allowing myself no visible reaction. Thank you. I have one additional motion before we adjourn. I move to create a new position of executive chair to oversee corporate culture and strategic alignment. I nominate myself for this position with the understanding that day-to-day operations will remain under the current CEO's purview, subject to board oversight. This passed with less resistance. Even Eric seemed relieved that I wasn't seeking to remove him entirely. As the meeting adjourned, board members approached to shake my hand, many murmuring quiet support. Eric remained seated, staring at the folders spread before him. When the room had emptied except for us, I gathered my papers and approached his chair. This wasn't about humiliating you, I said softly. This was about remembering who we are. He didn't look up. You've made your point. Is that all? No, I replied. There's one more thing. The company will be issuing a formal apology to Janet Kowalski, along with an offer to return as HR director, and the necklace is being returned to the jeweler. The funds will be redirected to reinstate the employee scholarship program, in your father's name. Eric finally met my gaze, his expression unreadable. Is that your way of twisting the knife? No, I said. It's my way of honoring his legacy and teaching you about ours. The weeks following the board meeting brought a cascade of changes, some immediate, others gradual. I moved into a modest office down the hall from Eric's, deliberately choosing not to reclaim Richard's old space. This wasn't about territory. It was about balance. News of the leadership shift spread quickly through the company. My first day back, I arrived to find a small gathering of longtime employees waiting by the elevator, Janet among them, already wearing a visitor's badge that would soon be replaced by her reinstated employee ID. Welcome home, she said simply, handing me a cup of coffee in one of the old mugs with the original company logo. I spent that first week listening more than talking. I walked the floors, reintroducing myself to familiar faces and meeting new ones. I reviewed department budgets, customer feedback, and employee satisfaction surveys. The picture that emerged was of a company that had grown impressively in revenue but had lost something essential in the process. Eric and I established a wary professional detente. Our interactions were formal, focused on business matters. He presented weekly reports in my office, his tone carefully neutral. I reviewed his proposals with fair consideration, approving many, questioning some, rejecting few. We operated like business associates with a complicated history, which, in many ways, was precisely what we had become. Melissa stopped coming to the office altogether. Caroline Henderson's name disappeared from company events. The country club membership was quietly transferred to Eric's personal accounts. Small corrections rippling outward. By the third week, subtle shifts began appearing in company operations. The aggressive pricing strategy that had alienated our long-standing small business customers was revised. The employee break room, which had been converted to an innovation lounge that nobody actually used, was restored with comfortable furniture and a quality coffee machine. The wall of contractor photos, documenting 3 decades of partnerships, was reinstalled in the main lobby. The most significant change came at the month-end executive meeting when our CFO presented the revised discretionary spending guidelines I had drafted. Effective immediately, executive gifts exceeding $250 must receive board approval, James explained, nodding in my direction. Additionally, 10% of quarterly profits will be allocated to the Richard Milford Memorial Scholarship Fund for employees' children and grandchildren. Eric shifted in his seat, but remained silent. Later, he stopped by my office. "The scholarship fund," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "It's a good idea." It was the closest thing to an olive branch he had offered. I accepted it with a nod. "Your father would have liked it." A tentative truce established, we began finding ways to blend Eric's innovative vision with the company's core values. His marketing strategies were genuinely effective. His instinct for emerging trends in the construction industry was sharp. What he had lacked was not business acumen but perspective, the understanding that growth without roots becomes unstable, top-heavy, vulnerable to the slightest wind. The press caught wind of our story by mid-April. The Boston Business Journal ran a profile titled "Founding Matriarch Returns: How Helen Milford Recalibrated a Family Business." The reporter, a thoughtful woman in her 50s, spent a full day shadowing me, asking questions about the company's history and future. "Was it difficult," she asked over lunch, "confronting your son in that boardroom?" I considered the question carefully. "It wasn't about confrontation," I finally answered. "It was about correction. Sometimes loving someone means showing them where the boundaries are." She nodded, making notes. "And how would you describe your working relationship now?" "Evolving," I said honestly. "We're finding our way back to mutual respect. That takes time." The article, when published, was fair and nuanced. It focused not on family drama, but on business ethics, generational transitions, and the challenge of modernizing without abandoning core principles. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Several local business schools requested guest lectures. 3 family-owned companies reached out for consulting on their own succession planning. Most surprising was the email that arrived from a women's business alliance in Worcester, inviting me to mentor young female entrepreneurs. "Your story resonates," the director wrote. "Many of us have experienced being sidelined or undervalued, particularly by those we helped elevate. We need voices like yours." I accepted the invitation, despite initial hesitation. Public speaking had always been Richard's domain, not mine. But standing before that first group of ambitious young women, their faces eager, their notebooks open, I found words flowing naturally. I shared not just business strategies, but the harder lessons about valuing your worth, establishing clear expectations, and the courage to reclaim your place at the table. The mentoring program became a monthly commitment. I found unexpected fulfillment in it, a chance to transform my painful experience into something constructive. Some of the young women reminded me of myself decades earlier. Others approached business with strategies I'd never considered. We learned from each other across the generational divide. 6 months after the board meeting, Eric approached me with a proposal, his first independent initiative since my return. "I've been thinking about regional expansion," he said, spreading market research across my desk. "Not the aggressive growth plan I had before, but something more sustainable, focused on underserved communities in Western Massachusetts." I reviewed his materials with genuine interest. The strategy was solid, balanced between innovation and stability, profit and community investment. "I'd like to lead this personally," he continued. "A chance to prove I've learned something." I studied my son's face, so like Richard's in profile, yet with my stubborn chin. The arrogance that had hardened his features had softened, replaced by something more thoughtful. "One condition," I replied. "The first location includes a training center for young people interested in the trades, named after your grandfather, who taught your father everything he knew about hardware." A smile tugged at Eric's mouth, small but genuine. "He used to let me organize the nail bins when I was 6, and you categorized them by both size and material," I recalled. "Richard said that's when he knew you had the family business sense." Something shifted between us in that moment. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. Recognition of the complex threads that bound us together beyond recent hurts. As for the infamous necklace, the $10,000 diamond piece that had sparked it all, it was indeed returned to the jeweler. The company received a partial refund, which, combined with the remaining funds, established the initial endowment for the scholarship program. The first recipients were announced at the company's holiday party, 3 children of longtime employees who would begin college the following fall. Caroline Henderson was notably absent from that gathering. Melissa attended briefly, more subdued than I'd ever seen her. She approached me during dinner, her expression carefully composed. "Eric's working late again," she said, an observation rather than a complaint. "The Western expansion is keeping him busy," I replied neutrally. She nodded, fidgeting with her water glass. "He's different now, more like when we first met." I waited, sensing there was more. "My mother asked about you," she finally continued. "She saw the article in the business journal." "Did she?" I kept my tone light. "She said she underestimated you." Melissa's eyes met mine directly for the first time in months. "So did I." I allowed myself a small smile. "Many people do. It's often an advantage." She almost returned the smile before excusing herself to mingle with other guests. We would never be close. Too much water under that particular bridge. But civility was its own kind of victory. Later that evening, as employees danced and celebrated, I found a quiet moment to slip away to Richard's old office, now a conference room named in his honor. His portrait hung on the wall, his expression serious, but with that hint of mischief around the eyes that had first attracted me 40 years earlier. "We did it, Richard," I whispered to the empty room. "We built something that will last." As if in answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Eric. "Meeting with Western Mass developers confirmed for Monday. Could use your input on the training center concept." I smiled at the screen, then back at Richard's portrait. Not perfect, but progress. Not just a legacy restored, but one being thoughtfully reimagined. Together.